13 years ago, an entire graduating class vanished during their high school commencement ceremony, disappearing without a trace and leaving their families shattered. Authorities suspected the school principal, who had mysteriously disappeared along with them, was involved, but with no bodies found and few leads to follow, the investigation eventually went cold. Yet through all these years, one determined father, a decorated Marine veteran, never gave up hope, clinging to the belief that his son was still out there somewhere. Then one day, while walking along a remote beach thousands of miles from home, he discovered dozens of graduation caps washing ashore. Caps that would reveal a crucial detail that everyone had overlooked. A detail that would change the entire a case and shock everyone involved in ways no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this extraordinary story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying this video, don't forget to subscribe. Michael Harrington awoke on the morning of June 15th, 2023, with a heaviness in his chest that had become all too familiar. The gentle ocean breeze drifting through his open window did little to soothe the ache that had settled deep within him 13 years ago. He had been preparing himself for this day, but even after all this time, the grief and uncertainty remained overwhelming. It was exactly 13 years since his son, James, and the entire Westridge High School class of 2010 had vanished during their graduation ceremony. Michael slowly rose from his bed, his joints protesting slightly, a combination of age and old military injuries making themselves known. The small beachfront cottage he had purchased 2 years ago was a far cry from the suburban home where he had raised James with his late wife, Catherine. After Catherine had passed away from cancer 5 years ago, unable to bear the dual burden of losing both her son and her health, Michael had left behind their home in Westridge, Connecticut, seeking solace in the quiet coastal town of Pelican Bay, Florida. He made his way to the small wooden desk in the corner of his bedroom, where a framed photograph stood prominently among his few possessions. It showed James in his football uniform, his smile wide and eyes bright with promise. Beside it was a smaller frame containing the last photo they had taken together, James in his graduation robe, his cap slightly askew, as father and son stood, arm in arm just hours before the ceremony that would change everything. "Another year, Jamie," Michael whispered, his voice rough with emotion as his fingers gently touched the glass. "I'm still looking, son." Michael had never been one to express his emotions freely. His years as a Marine had taught him to compartmentalize his feelings, but in the privacy of his cottage, he allowed himself this moment of vulnerability. 13 years of searching, of following every lead, of hoping against hope, had taken their toll, leaving behind a man who was but a shadow of his former self. The soft chime of his phone interrupted his thoughts. He glanced at the screen to find a message from Eleanor Reynolds, the mother of Sophia, James's girlfriend, who had also disappeared that day. "Thinking of you today, Michael. Call if you need to talk. We're all gathering at the Memorial Park this afternoon." Michael typed a brief response, thanking Eleanor but declining the invitation. He had attended the memorial services in Westridge for the first few years, standing stoically among the other grieving families, but he had found no comfort in their shared pain. While the others had gradually accepted the possibility that their children might never return, Michael had refused to let go of hope. It had created a divide between him and the other families, a divide that had only widened when he decided to leave Westridge altogether. After a quick shower, Michael dressed, in his usual attire of khaki shorts and a faded blue button-down shirt. He made himself a strong cup of coffee and stepped out onto the small porch of his cottage, gazing out at the ocean stretching before him. The beach was mostly empty at this early hour, with only a few dedicated morning joggers and shell collectors dotting the shoreline. His routine on this painful anniversary had remained unchanged for the past 2 years. He would spend the morning on his porch, allowing himself to remember, to grieve, and then he would walk along the beach for hours, finding a strange peace in the rhythmic sound of the waves and the feel of sand beneath his feet. As he sipped his coffee, Michael's mind drifted back to that fateful day 13 years ago. The Westridge High School graduation ceremony had been held in the school's football stadium, with proud parents and family members filling the bleachers under a perfect blue sky. Everything had proceeded normally at first. The principal's speech, the valedictorian address given by Sophia Reynolds, the presentation of diplomas. It was during the traditional cap toss that it happened. As nearly 300 graduation caps soared into the air, a strange mist had suddenly enveloped the field, thick and impenetrable. Parents in the bleachers had reported hearing a deep rumbling sound, followed by screams that were quickly silenced. When the mist cleared less than a minute later, the field was empty. The graduating seniors, along with Principal Warren Blackwood and 2 faculty members who had been on the field, had vanished without a trace. The chaos that followed was something Michael would never forget. The screams of parents, the confusion of law enforcement, the desperate searches that yielded nothing. Not a single graduate was found, not a single body recovered. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist in that moment. The investigation that followed was extensive, but ultimately fruitless. Principal Blackwood quickly became the prime suspect when it was discovered that he had withdrawn a significant amount of money from his bank accounts in the weeks leading up to graduation and had been researching remote locations online. Some theorized that he had somehow orchestrated a mass kidnapping, possibly with outside help, though the logistics of such an operation seemed impossible. Other theories emerged as the weeks turned into months: mass hallucination, terrorist attack, even alien abduction, but none offered any concrete answers. The case eventually went cold, with authorities acknowledging that they might never know what truly happened to the class of 2010. Michael finished his coffee and went back inside to refill his cup. His eyes drifted to the worn leather journal on his kitchen counter, its pages filled with notes, theories, and leads he had followed over the years. As a former military intelligence officer, Michael had approached his son's disappearance with the same methodical precision he had once applied to his work, documenting everything, questioning everything, refusing to accept the impossible. His phone rang, displaying a number he recognized all too well. Detective Sandra Martinez, the lead investigator on the case who had long since been reassigned, but who still kept in touch with Michael out of a mixture of professional courtesy and genuine concern. "Hello, Sandra," Michael answered, his voice steady despite the emotions churning within him. "Michael," Detective Martinez's voice was warm but cautious. "I was just checking in. I know today is difficult." 13 years, Michael said simply. "Hard to believe it's been that long. Any plans for today?" "Just the usual. Walking the beach, trying to keep busy." Michael paused before asking the question he already knew the answer to. "Anything new on the case?" There was a brief hesitation on the other end of the line. "Nothing concrete, I'm afraid. We still get the occasional tip, but nothing has panned out." Another pause. "Michael, I know you haven't given up, but it might be time to—" "Don't say it, Sandra," Michael interrupted, his tone more sharp than he intended. "Not today." Detective Martinez sighed. "I understand. Just take care of yourself, okay? Call if you need anything." After ending the call, Michael slipped his phone into his pocket and grabbed his wide-brimmed hat from the hook by the door. The morning was growing warmer, and he knew the Florida sun would be unforgiving later in the day. With one last glance at his son's photograph, he stepped outside and began his walk toward the beach. The sand was cool beneath his feet as he followed the shoreline, his eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. Over the years, Michael had developed a ritual of collecting small, uniquely shaped shells during these walks, keeping them in a jar on his windowsill as silent testimony to his continued search. It was a symbolic gesture. if he could find these. Tiny treasures among the vastness of the ocean. Perhaps one day he would find the answers he sought. As he walked, Michael noticed something unusual in the distance. The tide was receding, revealing what appeared to be debris scattered along the shoreline. Drawing closer, he realized it wasn't typical ocean debris, plastic bottles or driftwood, but something odd and out of place. His heart began to race as he quickened his pace, a strange sense of foreboding washing over him. When he was close enough to identify the objects, Michael stopped dead in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. Graduation caps, dozens of them, black and waterlogged, were washing up on the shore, carried in by the morning tide. Some were damaged, some remarkably intact, but all bore the unmistakable tassel and flat square shape of graduation caps. With trembling hands, Michael knelt down and picked up the nearest cap, turning it over carefully. On the underside, faded, but still legible, was a name written in silver marker: Sophie R. Sophia Reynolds, James's girlfriend. Michael's mind raced as he grabbed another cap, then another. Each bore a name, some familiar, some not, but all written in the same silver marker. It was a tradition at Westridge High for graduates to write their names inside their caps before the ceremony. His heart pounding in his chest, Michael frantically searched through the scattered caps, looking for one name in particular. He moved along the shoreline, examining each cap with growing desperation until finally he found it. A cap slightly larger than the others, with James H. written inside, along with a small drawing of a Marine Corps emblem, a nod to his father's service. That James had added with pride, Michael clutched the cap to his chest, a sob escaping his lips as emotions overwhelmed him. For 13 years, there had been nothing, no trace, no evidence, no closure. And now, on the anniversary of their disappearance, these caps had appeared as if delivered by the ocean itself. With shaking fingers, Michael pulled out his phone and dialed Detective Martinez's number. When she answered, he could barely form the words. "Sandra," he managed, his voice unsteady. "I found something. The caps, graduation caps, washing up on the beach here in Pelican Bay." There was a moment of silence before Detective Martinez responded, her voice cautious but alert. "Are you certain they're from Westridge? They have names, Sandra. Sophia Reynolds, James. My son's cap is in my hands right now." "Don't touch anything else," Detective Martinez instructed, her professional demeanor taking over. "I'm going to contact the local authorities in Pelican Bay and arrange for evidence collection. Send me your exact location." As Michael waited for the local police to arrive, he continued to survey the shoreline, counting nearly 50 caps in total, only a fraction of the nearly 300 graduates who had disappeared, but significant nonetheless. He took photos with his phone, documenting everything with the methodical precision that had become second nature to him over the years of searching. His mind raced with questions. How had these caps traveled all the way from Connecticut to Florida? Why were they appearing now, 13 years later? And most importantly, what did this mean for the missing graduates? Were they alive? Had they died at sea? Or was this some cruel twist, a deliberate message meant to reopen old wounds? When the local police arrived, accompanied by 2 FBI agents, who happened to be in the area on another case, Michael reluctantly handed over James's cap, watching as it was carefully placed in an evidence bag. He provided a statement explaining the significance of the discovery and the connection to the Westridge disappearance. "We'll need to collect all of these and arrange for them to be examined," one of the FBI agents explained. "If they've been in the ocean for any length of time, there could be barnacle growth patterns that might help determine their origin point." As the police cordoned off the area and began the painstaking process of collecting the caps, Michael stood at the edge of the perimeter, unwilling to leave. The weight of this discovery pressed upon him, a mixture of renewed hope and deepened dread swirling within his chest. His phone buzzed with a message from Detective Martinez. "I'm booking a flight to Florida. Will arrive this evening. Don't do anything without me." Michael knew what she meant. Over the years, he had occasionally taken matters into his own hands, following leads without police involvement, which had led to tension between them. But this was different. This was the first tangible evidence in 13 years, and he wasn't going to jeopardize it with impulsive actions. As he watched the methodical collection of the caps, Michael noticed one of the FBI agents examining a cap with particular interest. The agent, a young woman with short dark hair, approached him with the evidence bag. "Mr. Harrington, could you take a look at this? Is this consistent with the caps from your son's graduation?" Michael studied the cap through the clear plastic. It appeared identical to the others, but when the agent turned the bag to show the underside, he noticed something unusual. In addition to a name, Emily Kay, there was something else written in tiny letters along the edge of the cap. Blackwood's Island, 28.4 Degran, 80.5 Degran W, coordinates. And the name Blackwood, the same as the missing principal. Michael's heart raced as he looked up at the agent. "This wasn't there before," he said quietly. "Someone added this recently." The agent nodded, her expression serious. "That's what I thought. The ink is different, less faded than the name. We'll need to check these coordinates right away." As the agent walked away to share the discovery with her colleagues, Michael pulled out his phone and quickly entered the coordinates into a mapping application. The result made his blood run cold. A small, privately owned island off the coast of central Florida, less than 100 miles from where he now stood. All these years, he had been searching across the country, following tenuous leads and grasping at straws when the answer might have been just a short boat ride away from his new home. The irony was almost too much to bear. Michael looked out at the ocean, its vast expanse suddenly seeming smaller, less insurmountable. For the first time in 13 years, he felt something shift within him, not just hope, which had sustained him all these years, but certainty. A certainty that he was finally on the right path, that the answers he had sought for so long were within reach. As the last of the caps was collected and the police began to disperse, Michael remained on the beach, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Somewhere out there was the truth about what happened to his son and the other graduates of Westridge High, and he was more determined than ever to find it, no matter what it might reveal. The tide was coming in again, washing away the last traces of the cap's presence, but Michael knew that the wheel had been set in motion. After 13 years of darkness, a light had finally appeared, faint and uncertain, but unmistakably there, and he would follow it, wherever it might lead. As the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the beach, Michael found himself being ushered toward a police cruiser by a young officer with sympathetic eyes. The evidence collection team had established a perimeter around the area where the caps had washed ashore, their methodical approach a stark contrast to Michael's internal turmoil. "Sir, we'll need you to come to the station to provide a formal statement," the officer explained, opening the car door for him. "The FBI agents want to ask you some more detailed questions about the Westridge disappearance." Michael nodded, his mind still reeling from the discovery of the coordinates. As they drove through the quiet streets of Pelican Bay, a town he had chosen specifically for its anonymity and distance from his painful past, he felt the irony of the situation washing over him. Perhaps he had been drawn here for a reason. Perhaps some unconscious part of him had been following breadcrumbs all along. The Pelican Bay police station was a modest building of whitewashed concrete that stood just 2 blocks from the town's main street. Inside, Michael was led to an interview room where the two FBI agents were waiting. They introduced themselves as Special Agent Rebecca Torres and Special Agent Marcus Williams. "Mr. Harrington," Agent Torres began, "we understand from Detective Martinez that you've been actively investigating your son's disappearance for the past 13 years. It wasn't a question, but Michael answered anyway. "That's correct. I've documented everything I've found in these notebooks." He patted his backpack, which contained the most recent of his journals. "I've got 12 more at home." Agent Williams raised an eyebrow. "That's quite thorough. Detective Martinez mentioned you were military intelligence." "Marine Corps, 20 years, Michael confirmed. "I apply what I know." The agents exchanged a glance before Agent Torres continued. "We verified the coordinates found on the cap. They point to a small private island about 80 miles from here, officially listed as uninhabited on navigation charts, but registered to a shell corporation called Blackwood Enterprises." Michael felt his pulse quicken. Blackwood, like the principal. "It seems likely there's a connection," Agent Williams acknowledged. "We're in the process of securing a warrant to search the island, but these things take time, especially when dealing with private property." Michael leaned forward, his expression intense. "We don't have time. 13 years have already passed. If there's any chance my son is out there—" "Mr. Harrington," Agent Torres interrupted gently, "we understand your urgency, but we need to follow proper procedures. The Coast Guard has been notified to monitor the island, and no one will be leaving or arriving without our knowledge." Before Michael could respond, the door opened, and a familiar figure entered the room. Detective Sandra Martinez, looking tired from her hasty travel arrangements but alert, nodded to the agents before turning her attention to Michael. "I got here as fast as I could," she said, pulling up a chair. "The Bureau filled me in on the flight down." She turned to the FBI agents. "I'd like a moment alone with Mr. Harrington, if that's acceptable." The agents agreed and left the room, leaving Michael and Detective Martinez facing each other across the small table. For a moment, neither spoke. They had known each other for 13 years, their relationship evolving from formal investigator and victim's family to something more complicated. Not quite friendship, but a connection forged through shared dedication to a case others had long abandoned. "You look tired, Michael," Sandra finally said, her dark eyes studying him with professional assessment. "Haven't slept much today," he admitted. "Or the past few days, really. The anniversary always makes it difficult." Sandra nodded, understanding, without needing further explanation. "And now this." She placed a photograph on the table, one of the graduation caps in an evidence bag. "The lab is already analyzing them for trace evidence, but preliminary examination confirms they're consistent with the style worn at Westridge High's 2010 graduation." "It's not a coincidence, Sandra," Michael insisted. "Not on the anniversary. Not with those coordinates." "I agree," she said, surprising him. "But I need you to promise me something, Michael. Promise you won't do anything rash. Let us handle this by the book." Michael held her gaze for a long moment before looking away. They both knew he couldn't make that promise. Not when he was this close. Sandra sighed, recognizing his silent refusal. "At least give us 24 hours to secure the warrant and organize a proper search of the island. That's all I'm asking." 24 hours, Michael repeated, his tone making it clear that was as much as he was willing to concede. They spent the next hour reviewing the details of the cap discovery, with Sandra taking meticulous notes. When they finished, she walked him out of the station, pausing in the parking lot. "Where are you staying?" she asked. "I have a small cottage about a mile down the beach from where I found the caps," he replied. Sandra nodded. "I'll come by in the morning with an update. And Michael," she added, her voice taking on a warning tone, "I've got officers watching the marinas and boat rentals. Don't make me arrest you for obstruction." Michael managed a small, humorless smile. "Wouldn't dream of it." As Michael walked the mile back to his cottage, the setting sun cast long shadows across the beach. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and possibilities. The discovery of the caps had reignited a hope he had never fully relinquished, but had learned to temper over the years. Now that hope burned bright and dangerous, threatening to consume his caution. When he reached his cottage, Michael immediately went to his desk and pulled out a detailed map of the coastal waters. The coordinates on the cap, 28.4 degree, 80.5 degree W, corresponded to a small dot on the map, labelled simply as private. He had sailed past it many times during his fishing trips, never giving it a second thought. It was one of dozens of small islands dotting the coast, many owned by wealthy individuals seeking privacy or corporations using them for exclusive retreats. But now, looking at it with new eyes, Michael noted its strategic location. Far enough from shore to provide isolation, but close enough to be easily accessible by boat. Perfect for someone who wanted to disappear with nearly 300 people. He pulled out his phone and searched for Blackwood Enterprises, finding little beyond basic registration information. The company had been established 14 years ago, just 1 year before the disappearance, with minimal public footprint. Another search for Warren Blackwood yielded the familiar results he had seen countless times. News articles about the disappearance, old-school photographs and speculation about his involvement. A knock at his door interrupted his research. Michael tensed, wondering if Sandra had somehow anticipated his intentions and returned to check on him. Instead, when he opened the door, he found Eleanor Reynolds standing on his porch, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. "Eleanor," he said, surprised, "how did you find me?" "Detective Martinez called me about the caps," she explained, her voice steady despite her obvious emotion. "She thought I should know, given that Sophia's cap was among them. When I asked where you were staying, she gave me the address." She paused, studying his face. "May I come in?" Michael stepped aside, ushering her into the modest living area. Eleanor looked around, taking in the sparse furnishings and the wall, covered in maps, photographs and notes. Michael's ongoing investigation made visible. "You haven't given up," she observed, her tone unreadable. "Never," Michael replied simply. Eleanor had been one of the most vocal advocates for the families. In the early years after the disappearance, organizing search parties, press conferences, and memorial services. But as time passed and hope dimmed, she had gradually retreated from her public role, focusing instead on establishing a scholarship foundation in her daughter's name. She and Michael had once been allies in their determination to find answers, but their paths had diverged as she sought closure, and he refused to accept it. "Sandra told me about the coordinates," Eleanor said, moving closer to examine Michael's map. "This island, you think they might be there? After all this time?" "I think it's the first real lead we've had in 13 years, Michael replied carefully, unsure of her reaction. "And I intend to follow it." Eleanor was silent for a moment, her fingers tracing the path from the mainland to the small island. "On the map, the FBI is getting a warrant?" "Yes, but these things take time, especially for private property. They're asking for 24 hours. "And you're not planning to wait," Eleanor stated. Not a question, but a certainty based on years of knowing Michael's determination. Michael didn't confirm or deny, instead watching her face carefully. "Why are you here, Eleanor?" She turned to face him fully, her expression resolute. "Because if there's even the slightest chance that Sophia is on that island, I need to know. And I know you're going there tonight, with or without the FBI's blessing." Michael considered denying it, but there was no point. Eleanor knew him too well. "I have a friend with a boat," he admitted. "We're leaving at midnight. When the Coast Guard patrol changes shifts, there's a small cove on the northwest side of the island that's shielded from view. We can anchor there and go ashore." Eleanor nodded, her decision already made. "I'm coming with you." "Eleanor, this isn't negotiable, Michael," She cut him off, her voice firm. "Sophia is my daughter. If she's there, I need to be there too." Michael recognized the determination in her eyes, the same unwavering resolve he saw in his own reflection. Each morning, he nodded slowly. "Be back here at 11:30, wear dark clothing and bring a flashlight." After Eleanor left, Michael made a phone call to his friend, Captain Ray Dawson, a fellow veteran who ran fishing charters out of a small marina south of Pelican Bay. Ray had been one of the few people Michael had connected with since moving to Florida, their shared military background creating an immediate bond. "Everything's set," Ray confirmed over the phone. "I'll meet you at the dock at 11:45. But Mike, you need to know, this could cost me my license if we get caught." "I understand the risk, Ray. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important." "I know that," Ray replied solemnly. "That's why I'm doing it." Michael spent the next few hours preparing, gathering supplies, a first aid kit, water, energy bars, his old military-issue combat knife, and a handheld GPS device. He changed into dark clothes and sturdy boots, then sat on his porch watching the sun sink below the horizon, the sky transitioning from brilliant orange to deep indigo. As darkness fell completely, Michael found himself thinking about James, not as the missing teenager from the photographs, but as the little boy who had climbed into his lap after nightmares, the child who had waited eagerly for his father to return from deployments, the young man who had told him proudly of his acceptance. To the University of Connecticut, 13 years of memories, frozen in time, with nothing new to add. "I'm coming, Jamie," he whispered to the night sky. "Hold on." At precisely 11:30, Eleanor arrived, dressed in black pants and a dark navy sweatshirt, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She carried a small backpack and wore a determined expression that reminded Michael of the woman she had been in those first desperate days after the disappearance, focused, resolute, unbreakable. They drove in silence to the marina, parking Ray's truck in a secluded spot away from the main lot. Ray was waiting for them at the end of the dock, his 30-foot fishing boat, the Second Chance, idling quietly in the water. "Evening, folks," Ray greeted them in a low voice, helping Eleanor aboard before turning to Michael. "Coast Guard, just changed shifts. We've got about a 30-minute window before the next patrol comes through the area." "That should be enough," Michael replied, stepping onto the boat. "It's about a 40-minute trip to the island at cruising speed." As Ray guided the boat out of the marina and into the open water, Michael and Eleanor stood at the bow, watching. The distant lights of Pelican Bay recede behind them. The night was clear, a three-quarter moon casting silver light across the gentle waves, providing just enough illumination for their journey without exposing them completely. "I almost didn't. I'll come to Florida," Eleanor said after a long silence, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "When Sandra called, I almost said it was too painful, that I'd rather not know." She turned to Michael, her eyes glistening in the moonlight. "But then I thought of you, still searching after all these years, never giving up. And I realized I owed it to Sophia to be as brave as you've been." Michael shook his head, feeling unworthy of her praise. "It's not bravery, Eleanor. It's desperation, and maybe a bit of madness." "No," she insisted, placing a hand on his arm. "It's love, the kind that doesn't fade, even when everyone tells you it should." They lapsed into companionable silence as the boat cut through the dark waters. Michael checked his GPS periodically, watching as they drew closer to the coordinates that might finally lead him to answers. After years of searching, the island was now less than 5 miles away, its shape beginning to materialize against the horizon, a dark silhouette rising from the ocean, mysterious and forbidding. Ray reduced the engine to a low idle as they approached, navigating carefully toward the northwest cove Michael had identified. The island appeared uninhabited, no lights visible among the dense trees that covered most of its surface. A small beach provided access to the interior, with what appeared to be a path leading into the vegetation. "I'll anchor here," Ray whispered, as they entered the sheltered cove. "The water's shallow enough that you can wade ashore. I'll maintain radio silence unless there's an emergency." He handed Michael a small two-way radio. "Channel 3, encrypted. Coast Guard uses 1 and 2. Michael nodded, securing the radio to his belt before turning to Eleanor. "Last chance to change your mind." She simply gave him a look that communicated everything necessary without words. Together, they lowered themselves into the warm, shallow water, Michael leading the way as they waded toward the narrow strip of beach. The sand was cool beneath their feet as they emerged from the ocean, both immediately crouching low and scanning their surroundings for any sign of movement or detection. The island was eerily silent, save for the gentle lapping of waves against the shore and the distant calls of night birds. Michael pulled out his GPS, confirming their position relative to the coordinates from the cap. "We need to head inland," he whispered to Eleanor. "According to this, there should be some kind of structure about half a mile from here." Eleanor nodded, her expression tense but determined, as they began to make their way along the narrow path, the dense tropical vegetation closing in around them. Michael led the way, his military training evident in his cautious movements and constant vigilance. As they ventured deeper into the island, the path widened slightly, showing signs of regular use, branches trimmed back, the ground packed from frequent footsteps. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as the evidence mounted that the island was indeed inhabited, despite its official designation as uninhabited. After about 15 minutes of careful progress, the path opened into a small clearing, and Michael stopped abruptly, signaling for Eleanor to do the same. Ahead of them, partially concealed by strategic landscaping, but unmistakable in the moonlight, stood a modern, sprawling compound, a main building with several smaller structures surrounding it, all connected by covered walkways. And most tellingly, lights glowed from within, proof that whatever secrets this island held, they were about to be revealed. Michael and Eleanor crouched at the edge of the clearing, their eyes fixed on the illuminated compound before them. The main building was a two-story structure with large windows and a flat roof, surrounded by smaller cabins connected by covered walkways. The entire complex had been skillfully integrated into the natural environment, making it nearly invisible from the air or sea. A perfect hiding place. "I count 4 satellite buildings," Michael whispered, his military assessment instinctive. "Minimal security visible from this angle, no cameras on the perimeter that I can see." Eleanor nodded, her breath coming in short, controlled bursts, as she fought to contain her growing anxiety. "Do you think they're in there, after all this time?" Michael didn't answer immediately, his mind racing through possibilities. The presence of a hidden compound on an island registered to a company sharing. The missing principal's name was too significant to dismiss, but after 13 years, what might they find? Had the graduates been kept here against their will? Or was this some kind of sanctuary, a place they had fled to willingly? Or something darker, perhaps just evidence of what had happened to them? "We need to get closer," he finally said. "Follow me and stay in the shadows." They moved along the tree line, circling to approach the compound from the eastern side, where the vegetation grew denser and the moonlight cast deeper shadows. As they drew nearer, they began to notice details that sent chills down Michael's spine. The windows, while appearing normal from a distance, were reinforced with subtle but unmistakable security features. The glass was thicker than standard, likely bulletproof, and the frames showed signs of advanced locking mechanisms. More troubling still, as they approached one of the smaller buildings, Michael spotted what appeared to be dormitory-style accommodations. Through a partially open window shade, bunk beds lined the walls, made up with identical grey blankets, reminiscent of military barracks or an institutional setting. "This isn't a vacation retreat," he murmured to Eleanor, who had noticed the same details, her face paling in the moonlight. They continued their cautious approach, moving from shadow to shadow until they reached the exterior wall of the main building. A soft hum of conversation and movement could be heard from within, confirming the presence of multiple people. Michael led them toward a window where the blinds weren't completely closed, allowing a narrow view into what appeared to be a large communal dining area. What they saw inside froze them both in place. The dining hall contained several long tables, around which sat approximately 30 people of varying ages. They wore simple, uniform-like clothing, grey pants and white shirts for the men, grey skirts and white blouses for the women. But it was their faces that caused Eleanor to stifle. A gasp behind her hand. Though they were now in their early 30s, there was no mistaking the features of several former Westridge High graduates. Their appearances had changed with age, certainly, but to parents who had memorized every detail of their children's faces, they were instantly recognizable. "That's David Chen," Michael whispered, indicating a tall Asian man serving food at one of the tables. He was James's lab partner in chemistry. Eleanor's fingers dug into Michael's arm as she leaned closer to the window. And there, at the far table, that's Melissa Abernathy. She was in the drama club with Sophia. Her voice trembled. "Michael, they're alive. They're actually alive." The realization should have brought overwhelming joy, but the clinical controlled environment of the compound and the strange, almost robotic movements of the graduates created an undercurrent of dread. These weren't people living normal lives. They appeared to be following some kind of regulated routine, their expressions eerily neutral as they ate and conversed in measured tones. Michael's eyes scanned the room desperately, searching for the one face he had crossed an ocean to find. "I don't see James," he said, the hope in his voice tinged with disappointment. "Or Sophia." "Maybe they're in another building," Eleanor suggested, her earlier shock now hardening into determination. "We need to see more." They moved carefully along the exterior wall, checking each window they passed. Most were covered completely, but occasionally they caught glimpses of interior spaces, a large room filled with computers where several graduates worked in silence, a medical area with examination tables and equipment, what appeared to be classrooms where boards displayed complex mathematical equations and scientific diagrams. "What is this place?" Eleanor whispered. "Some kind of research facility. Are they prisoners or participants?" Before Michael could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps caused them both to freeze. Someone was walking along the covered pathway from one of the smaller buildings, heading directly toward their position. With no time to retreat to the safety of the trees, Michael pulled Eleanor into a recessed doorway, pressing themselves against the wall as the footsteps grew louder. Through the shadows, they watched as a middle-aged man in a white lab coat passed by, less than 10 feet from their hiding place. The man was slight in build, with thinning grey hair and wire-rimmed glasses. But there was no mistaking his identity. Principal Warren Blackwood, the man suspected of orchestrating the disappearance 13 years ago. Eleanor's sharp intake of breath was thankfully masked by the sound of Blackwood entering a code on a nearby door, which slid open with a soft electronic hum. As he disappeared inside, Michael and Eleanor exchanged stunned glances. "He's alive," Eleanor whispered unnecessarily. "He's been here all along." "And apparently in charge," Michael added, noting the authoritative manner in which Blackwood had moved through the compound. "We need to follow him." The door Blackwood had entered required a security code, making it impossible to follow directly. Instead, they continued their exterior reconnaissance, moving toward the building Blackwood had come from. As they approached, they noticed that unlike the main structure, this smaller building had a higher level of security. a camera mounted above its entrance, and what appeared to be a reinforced door. "Whatever's in there is important," Michael said, eyeing the camera's sweep pattern. "We'll have to time this carefully." They waited for the camera to complete its arc away from them, then darted across the exposed ground to the side of the building. Unlike the main complex, this structure had smaller, higher windows, making it difficult to see inside. Michael found a utility box affixed to the exterior wall and, drawing on his military training, quickly identified it as an auxiliary power system. "If I can cause a temporary outage in this building," he explained to Eleanor, "it might disable the electronic. Locks long enough for us to get inside." Eleanor nodded her understanding, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of detection. "Do it." Michael worked quickly, manipulating the connections in the utility box. After a tense minute, he whispered, "This should trigger a surge that will trip the breakers. When the lights go out, we move immediately to that door. There's likely an emergency override that will unlock it briefly before backup power kicks in." The moment he completed the final connection, the effect was immediate. The lights in the building flickered and died, plunging the structure into darkness. Michael and Eleanor rushed to the door, which had indeed unlocked as the security system reset. They slipped inside just as emergency lighting began to glow dimly in the hallway. The interior of the building was clinically sterile, with polished floors and white walls reminiscent of a hospital or laboratory. The hallway branched in two directions, with multiple doors on either side. Each door had a small window and an electronic nameplate displaying what appeared to be identification numbers rather than names. "It's some kind of dormitory," Eleanor whispered, peering through the window of the nearest door. Inside was a small, sparse room with a bed, desk, and basic amenities, occupied by a young woman who was currently standing at her desk, looking confused by the momentary power outage. Michael glanced through another window and felt his heart constrict. The occupant, a young man with dark hair, was seated on his bed reading a book. Though 13 years had passed, transitioning the teenager Michael remembered into a man approaching 30, there was no mistaking his son's features. "James," he breathed, his voice catching in his throat. "Eleanor, I found him." As Eleanor hurried to his side, Michael was already trying the door handle, finding it locked despite the power disruption. This section of the building apparently had a different security system, one that defaulted to locked rather than unlocked. During an outage, through the window, James seemed to sense their presence, looking up from his book with a furrowed brow. When his eyes met Michael's, there was no immediate recognition, just curiosity and perhaps a hint of alarm at seeing strangers in the hallway. "He doesn't recognize me," Michael said, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Try the next room," Eleanor urged, moving down the hall. "Sophia might be nearby." Michael tore his gaze away from his son and followed Eleanor as she checked each window. 3 doors down, she stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry. Inside was a young woman with auburn hair, seated at a desk writing in a notebook. Though her hair was shorter than Eleanor remembered, and her face had matured, it was unmistakably Sophia Reynolds. "She's here," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. "My baby's here." Before they could decide on their next move, the sound of a door opening at the end of the hallway sent them ducking into a nearby utility closet. Through the narrow opening they left in the door, they watched as Principal Blackwood entered the hallway, accompanied by a woman in a similar white lab coat. They were discussing something in low, urgent tones, clearly concerned about the power fluctuation. "The system registered an exterior power surge," the woman was saying. "I've dispatched security to check the perimeter. Increase monitoring of the subjects," Blackwood replied, his voice eerily familiar to Eleanor and Michael, who had heard it at countless school functions before the disappearance. Any disruption to their routine could trigger memory fragments. We can't risk a regression so close to completion. The pair moved down the hallway, checking each room briefly before continuing to the next. As they approached James's room, Michael tensed, watching through the crack in the door as Blackwood entered his son's quarters. "How are you feeling, Subject 117? Blackwood asked, his tone clinical but not unkind. James looked up from his book, his expression neutral. "I'm well, Director, just a bit startled by the power fluctuation." "Nothing to worry about," Blackwood assured him. "Just a minor system hiccup. Continue with your evening routine. Remember, tomorrow is an important day for your research group." James nodded obediently. "Yes, Director. I've prepared thoroughly for the presentation." As Blackwood left and continued down the hall with his colleague, Michael felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. The interaction had been disturbing in its formality. Blackwood referring to James by a subject number, James addressing him as Director, with no hint of recognition or resistance. It suggested something far more sinister than mere captivity. "They don't know who they are," Michael whispered, once Blackwood and the woman had moved out of earshot. "It's like they've been reprogrammed." Eleanor's face was pale with horror. "Mind control. Is that even possible?" "Not in the science fiction sense," Michael replied, his mind racing. "But there are methods, drugs, psychological conditioning, isolation techniques that can significantly alter perception and memory. My unit encountered cases during the war. Subjects who had been systematically broken down and rebuilt with new identities, new loyalties. The implications were staggering. If Blackwood had spent 13 years subjecting the graduates to such techniques, their original identities might be deeply suppressed or even permanently altered. The question was why? What purpose did this elaborate facade serve? "We need to get them out of here," Eleanor said firmly. "All of them, but we can't do it alone." Michael nodded, understanding the impossible situation they faced. Even if they could somehow overcome the security systems and free James and Sophia, there were dozens of other graduates in the compound, all potentially conditioned to resist rescue. And without knowing what methods had been used on them, sudden extraction could cause psychological trauma. "We need to go back," he said reluctantly. "Get to the authorities with what we've found. This is bigger than just James and Sophia now." As they prepared to leave their hiding place, the sound of an alarm suddenly blared throughout the building. Red emergency lights began flashing in the hallway, and a calm, automated voice announced, "Security breach detected. All personnel implement containment protocol. All subjects return to assigned quarters immediately." "They've discovered the power tampering," Michael realized, tension coiling in his muscles. "We need to move now, before they lock down the entire compound." They slipped out of the closet and hurried back the way they had come. But as they rounded the corner toward the exit, they found their path blocked by two security guards armed with what appeared to be non-lethal restraint devices. Behind them stood Principal Blackwood, his expression shifting from surprise to cold calculation as he recognized the intruders. "Michael Harrington," he said, his voice betraying only mild surprise. "And Eleanor Reynolds. I suppose I should have expected. This day would come eventually." Michael pushed Eleanor behind him, his body instinctively shifting into a defensive stance. "What have you done to our children, Blackwood?" he demanded, voice low and dangerous. Blackwood adjusted his glasses, seemingly unfazed by Michael's aggression. "What I've done is given them purpose, Mr. Harrington. Something far greater than the mundane futures that awaited them in Westridge." He gestured to one of the guards. "Detain them carefully. They are, after all, the parents of two of our most valuable subjects." The guards advanced, but Michael, drawing on years of military training, was ready. He feinted left, then struck. rapidly disabling the first guard with a precise blow to the solar plexus, followed by a sweep that took the man's legs out from under him. The second guard, momentarily surprised, hesitated just long enough for Michael to close the distance and deliver a stunning strike to the man's temple. Blackwood backed away, reaching for what appeared to be a communication device, but Eleanor moved with surprising speed, knocking it from his hand. "Where is my daughter?" she demanded. Years of grief and anger finally finding their target. Blackwood's composure cracked slightly, his eyes darting between Michael and Eleanor. "You don't understand what's at stake here. These children, they're part of something revolutionary, something that will change humanity's future. They're not your test subjects," Michael growled, advancing on the principal. "They're people with families, with lives you stole from them." A commotion from behind them indicated more security was on the way. Michael grabbed Blackwood by the collar, pushing him against the wall. "You're coming with us. You're going to explain everything to the authorities." But Blackwood merely smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent chills down Michael's spine. "Do you really think anyone would believe you? That an entire graduating class was abducted and kept on a private island for 13 years? The world has already forgotten them, Mr. Harrington. Everyone except you." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. Michael knew they had seconds at most before they would be overwhelmed. With a quick glance at Eleanor, he made a decision. "Run," he urged her. "Get back to Ray. Get to the authorities. I'll hold them off." Eleanor shook her head firmly. "I'm not leaving without Sophia." "You have to," Michael insisted. "Someone needs to make it off this island with what we've discovered. Otherwise, all of this was for nothing." The truth of his words registered in Eleanor's eyes, though the anguish of leaving her daughter behind was evident in every line of her face. With a quick, fierce hug, she turned and sprinted toward the exit, disappearing down the hallway just as reinforcements rounded the corner. Michael released Blackwood and took a defensive stance, prepared to buy Eleanor as much time as possible. As the security team surrounded him, he caught a glimpse of movement in the hallway behind them. James had emerged from his room, watching the commotion with a mixture of confusion and something else. Something that looked almost like recognition as his eyes met Michael's across the distance. Then the guards were upon him, and Michael's world exploded into chaos and pain as they subdued him with clinical efficiency. His last conscious thought, before darkness claimed him, was of his son's face and the flicker of something familiar he thought he had seen in those eyes, a glimmer of the boy he had lost 13 years ago. Michael regained consciousness slowly, his senses returning one by one. First the antiseptic smell, then the soft hum of medical equipment, and finally the dull ache permeating his body. He was lying on a firm bed in what appeared to be an infirmary, his wrists secured to the railings with padded restraints. The room was stark white with no windows, illuminated by recessed lighting that cast no shadows. As his vision cleared, he noticed a figure seated beside his bed, observing him with clinical interest. It was the woman he had seen with Blackwood. Earlier, middle-aged, with short grey hair, pulled back in a severe bun, her white lab coat pristine, and her expression unreadable behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice neutral and professional. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Morrow, Chief Scientific Officer of the Ascendancy Project." Michael tested his restraints, finding them secure but not painfully tight. "Where is Eleanor?" he demanded, his throat dry and voice raspy. Dr. Morrow made a note on the tablet she held. "Mrs. Reynolds managed to escape the island, though I imagine she's having difficulty convincing authorities of what she found here. The isolated ravings of a grief-stricken mother rarely inspire rapid response from law enforcement." She set the tablet down, studying Michael with clinical detachment. "You, however, present a more immediate concern. Where is my son?" Michael's question was direct, his eyes never leaving the doctor's face. "Subject 117 is continuing his regular schedule," she replied. "Your presence has been noted as an anomaly, but we've implemented cognitive barriers to prevent disruption of his progress." Michael's jaw tightened. "His name is James Harrington. He's my son, not your subject." Dr. Morrow's expression remained impassive. "That identity ceased to exist 13 years ago, Mr. Harrington. The young man you saw bears no meaningful connection to the teenager you lost. He is, quite literally, a different person now, one with extraordinary capabilities that serve a greater purpose." Before Michael could respond, the door opened and Principal Blackwood entered, looking composed despite the previous night's confrontation. He nodded to Dr. Morrow before turning his attention to Michael. "I hope you rested well," Blackwood said, his tone conversational, as if they were old acquaintances. "I apologize for the restraints, but your military background necessitates certain precautions." Michael glared at him, channeling 13 years of grief and rage into his gaze. "What have you done to them, Blackwood? What is this place?" Blackwood exchanged a glance with Dr. Morrow before pulling up a chair opposite her. "I suppose you deserve some explanation, given your persistence all these years. Most of the other parents gave up long ago, accepting the tragedy and moving on, but not Michael Harrington, the relentless father who never stopped searching." He almost sounded admiring. "The Ascendancy Project," Blackwood continued, "began as a theoretical concept in educational neuroscience. The idea that young minds, when completely isolated from societal constraints and cognitive limitations, could develop intellectual and creative capabilities far beyond normal human potential. The traditional educational system stifles innovation, conforming brilliant minds to mediocre standards." His eyes gleamed with fervor. "I witnessed this firsthand as an educator, watching exceptional students like your son James being gradually molded into conventional thinkers, their potential squandered for the sake of standardized testing and college admissions." "So you kidnapped them?" Michael's voice was incredulous. "Stole their lives, their identities, their futures, all for some twisted experiment," Dr. Morrow interjected, her clinical tone a stark contrast to Blackwood's passion. "The conversion process is sophisticated neurological reprogramming, not mere brainwashing, as you might imagine. We selectively suppressed original memories while enhancing cognitive pathways associated with specific intellectual domains. Each subject was assessed for their natural aptitudes and assigned to specialized research groups focusing on theoretical physics, advanced mathematics, biotechnology, and cognitive computing." Michael felt sick as the implications sank in. "You've turned them into human computers. We've liberated them from the limitations of conventional existence," Blackwood corrected. "The Westridge class of 2010 has made scientific breakthroughs that would have taken mainstream researchers decades to achieve. Their work on quantum entanglement alone has applications that will transform global communications, energy production, even space exploration." "At the cost of their humanity," Michael said bitterly. "Their families, their choices, their identities." Blackwood leaned forward, his expression intense. "Individual identity is overrated, Mr. Harrington. What matters is collective advancement. These young people are part of something far greater than the ordinary lives they would have led. College, careers, marriages, the slow decline into mediocrity that awaits most humans. Here they've transcended such limitations." Michael studied Blackwood's face, recognizing the dangerous zealotry in his eyes. "You actually believe you're helping them?" "I know I am," Blackwood replied confidently. "The results speak for themselves. Your son, for instance, leads our quantum computing division. His theoretical framework for stable quantum bits has solved problems that the finest minds at MIT and Cambridge declared unsolvable. He's extraordinary. Far more extraordinary than..." he ever would have been as simply James Harrington, business major at the University of Connecticut. The casual mention of James's former college plans, a detail that had been decided just days before his disappearance, sent a chill through Michael. Blackwood had been planning this abduction meticulously, gathering personal details about each student's future to better erase and replace them. "What about the caps?" Michael asked, recalling the discovery that had led him here. "Why were they washing up on the beach after 13 years? Dr. Morrow and Blackwood exchanged another glance, this one tinged with what almost looked like concern. "A miscalculation," Dr. Morrow admitted reluctantly. "Part of our memory suppression protocol involves periodic reinforcement through symbolic ritual. On each anniversary of their arrival, the subjects participate in a ceremony where they symbolically release their past selves by committing personal items to the ocean. Usually we use photographs or written materials, items that will decompose. This year, Director Blackwood decided the graduation caps would be more powerful symbols." "You didn't consider ocean currents," Michael realized, a hint of bitter satisfaction in his voice. "You didn't expect them to wash ashore near a public beach." "An oversight," Blackwood acknowledged stiffly, "one that will be addressed in our future protocols." "It doesn't matter now," Michael said, his mind working rapidly. "Eleanor is free. She'll have reached the authorities by now." Blackwood's smile was thin. "Mrs. Reynolds will find herself facing significant credibility issues. Consider the scenario from an outsider's perspective. A grieving mother, known for her emotional fragility since her daughter's disappearance, makes wild claims about a secret island where hundreds of missing people are being held against their will. Even if she manages to convince someone to investigate, our security systems will detect any approach long before they reach the island." "What are you planning to do with me?" Michael asked directly, testing his restraints again. Dr. Morrow stood, straightening her lab coat. "You present a unique opportunity, Mr. Harrington. Your son has been exhibiting minor resistance to our reinforcement protocols recently, a natural phenomenon as subjects mature. Your presence might serve as a catalyst for an experimental reset procedure we've been developing." The clinical way she discussed manipulating his son's mind sent rage coursing through Michael. "If you think I'm going to help you further damage my son's mind, your cooperation isn't required," Blackwood interrupted smoothly. "Merely your presence. Subject 117 will be brought here shortly for a controlled interaction. Your emotional responses will trigger specific neural pathways that we can then target for reinforcement or suppression." "You're going to use me to help erase his memories of me," Michael realized, horror washing over him. Blackwood stood, moving toward the door. "Science requires sacrifice, Mr. Harrington. Your son has made his. Now it's your turn." As they left, him alone in the sterile room, Michael fought against the despair threatening to overwhelm him. His son was alive, but living a life fabricated by Blackwood and his team of scientists, a prisoner whose mind had been altered to accept his captivity as purpose. The other graduates were similarly trapped, their brilliant minds harnessed for Blackwood's twisted vision of scientific advancement. Michael had found his son, but the reunion promised to be far more painful than he could have imagined. Worse still, he might become the unwitting instrument of James losing the last fragments of his true identity. Left alone, Michael intensified his struggle against the restraints, desperation fueling his efforts. The padded cuffs were secure, but not designed for someone with his determination. Years of obsessive searching had hardened his resolve beyond what Blackwood and Dr. Morrow could possibly understand. A father's love transformed into an unstoppable force. As he worked, Michael surveyed the room for anything that might aid his escape. The infirmary was sparsely equipped, a monitoring station, cabinets likely containing medical supplies, and a small sink in the corner. His military training kicked in as he assessed potential weapons, escape routes, and the approximate time intervals between staff checks. After 20 minutes of methodical effort, Michael managed to create enough slack in the right restraint to twist his wrist partially free. The skin tore as he forced his hand through the narrow opening, but pain was irrelevant compared to the urgency of his situation. With one hand free, he quickly released his other wrist and ankles, then moved silently to the door. It was locked as expected, with a keycard reader beside it. Michael pressed his ear against the door, listening for movement in the hallway beyond. Hearing nothing, he turned his attention to the cabinets, quickly searching for anything useful. Most contained standard medical supplies, but in a drawer that he forced open with a metal clipboard, he found a collection of vials and syringes. The labels meant little to him, but one, marked Sedative Protocol B, seemed promising. If they intended to use him in some procedure with James, they would likely need to control him. This could be the very sedative they planned to administer. Michael filled a syringe and concealed it in his sleeve, then continued his search. In the final cabinet, he discovered a lab coat and identification badge belonging to a Dr. Alan Pritchard. The photo bore only a passing resemblance to Michael, but it might be enough to avoid immediate detection if he encountered someone in the hallway. Donning the lab coat over his clothes, Michael returned to the bed and arranged the sheets to create the illusion of an occupied bed when viewed from the doorway. Then he positioned himself beside the entrance, waiting for someone to check on him. His patience was rewarded 15 minutes later when the electronic lock beeped and the door began to open. A young technician entered, carrying a tray with what appeared to be monitoring equipment. Before the man could register that the bed was empty, Michael struck precisely at the base of his neck, a non-lethal pressure point that sent him crumpling to the floor. Unconscious but unharmed, Michael dragged the unconscious technician to the bed, securing him with the same restraints he had escaped from. He took the man's keycard and communication device, then slipped into the hallway, closing the door quietly behind him. The corridor was mercifully empty. Michael moved with purpose, projecting the confidence of someone who belonged there, while consulting directional signs on the walls. He needed to find James quickly before Blackwood initiated whatever procedure they had planned. According to the signage, he was in the medical wing of the main building. Subject dormitories were located in a separate structure, the same building where he had spotted James the previous night. Michael headed toward an exit, planning to circle around to the dormitory, when an announcement came over the facility's communication system. Attention all research staff. Preliminary integration session with Subject 117 will commence in Laboratory 3 in 15 minutes. Observation team leaders report to Dr. Morrow for briefing. Michael froze. They were moving forward with their plans. For James. Changing direction, he followed signs toward the research laboratories, maintaining his purposeful stride whenever he passed other staff members, who barely glanced at him. Laboratory 3 was located in a heavily secured section of the facility. As Michael approached, he noticed increased security. 2 guards stationed outside the laboratory entrance, checking credentials of everyone entering. His stolen keycard might get him through the door, but the guards would certainly recognize he wasn't Dr. Pritchard. Backing away before being noticed, Michael sought an alternative approach. A service corridor ran parallel to the main hallway, likely providing maintenance access to the laboratories. Using the stolen keycard, he gained entry and navigated through a maze of utility pipes and electrical conduits until he found an access panel that, according to the schematics posted on the wall, should open into Laboratory 3's storage closet. Carefully removing the panel, Michael slipped into the dimly lit storage area just as voices became audible in the main laboratory. Peering through a ventilation grate in the door, he could see Dr. Morrow directing several technicians as they prepared equipment. Monitors displayed brain scan images and what appeared to be neural pathway models. "The subject will be here momentarily," Dr. Morrow was saying, Remember, this is an observational procedure only. No interaction with subject 117 or the stimulus subject. The stimulus subject was clearly him, or was supposed to be. Michael realized he needed to create a distraction, substantial enough to interrupt their procedure and potentially evacuate the facility. His eyes fell on the laboratory's gas lines, an idea forming rapidly. He was about to act when the laboratory door opened and 2 guards escorted James into the room. The sight of his son, now a grown man but unmistakably James, stopped Michael. Cold. James wore the same grey uniform he had seen other subjects wearing, his expression neutral as he allowed himself to be guided to a chair in the center of the room. "Subject 117, please be seated," Dr. Morrow instructed. "Today's procedure will involve cognitive response mapping. You may experience some unusual memory fragments, but this is a normal part of the process." James nodded obediently. "Yes, Doctor." "Will this affect my work on the quantum entanglement project?" "Not at all," she assured him. "In fact, this procedure should enhance your cognitive focus." As technicians began attaching monitoring devices to James's head, Dr. Morrow consulted a tablet. "Bring in the stimulus subject," she ordered, looking toward the door. When no one appeared, confusion spread across her face. "Where is Harrington? He should have been prepped and ready." One of the technicians activated a communication device. "Security, what's the status on prisoner Harrington's transport to Laboratory 3? The response sent immediate alarm through the room. "Prisoner Harrington has escaped containment. All security personnel initiate search protocol immediately." In the ensuing confusion, Michael seized his opportunity. He burst from the storage closet, syringe in hand, and moved with military precision. Before anyone could react, he had incapacitated the nearest guard and seized his weapon, a non-lethal but effective stun baton. The second guard reached for his own weapon but hesitated, unwilling to risk hitting the valuable subject seated in the center of the room. That moment of hesitation was all Michael needed. He subdued the second guard with a precise strike, then turned to face Dr. Morrow, who was backing toward an alarm panel on the wall. "Don't," Michael warned, his voice deadly calm as he aimed the stun baton at her. "Step away from the panel." Dr. Morrow froze, her eyes calculating. The technicians huddled together, clearly untrained for confrontation. Throughout this sudden violence, James remained seated, his expression shifting from calm acceptance to confused observation. He studied Michael with growing intensity, his brow furrowed as if trying to solve a complex equation. "James," Michael said, his voice softening as he addressed his son directly for the first time in 13 years. "Do you know who I am?" James tilted his head slightly, his eyes never leaving Michael's face. "You're the intruder from last night. Security Protocol 7 Alpha classifies you as a threat to the facility." "I'm your father," Michael replied, emotion thickening his voice. "Your real name is James Harrington. You were born in Westridge, Connecticut. You played football. You wanted to study business. You disappeared during your high school graduation 13 years ago." James's expression remained perplexed, but something flickered in his eyes, a momentary connection that gave Michael hope. Before he could say more, the laboratory door burst open and Blackwood rushed in, flanked by security personnel. "Secure." "Subject 117, Blackwood ordered sharply. "Harrington is attempting to trigger cognitive corruption." As guards moved to separate them, James suddenly spoke, his voice uncertain. "Graduation. The caps. We threw them in the air." His hand moved to his temple as if in pain. There was fog. "He's remembering," Michael realized aloud. "The memory suppression is breaking down." Blackwood's face contorted with rage. "Restrain them both. Initiate emergency memory protocols." Michael knew he couldn't fight his way past the reinforcements flooding into the laboratory. Instead, he made a split-second decision. Grabbing James by the arm, he pulled his son toward the storage closet he had emerged from. "What are you doing?" James demanded, though he didn't resist. Saving you, Michael answered simply, dragging him through the closet and into the maintenance corridor beyond. All of you. As they fled through the service passages, alarm sirens began blaring throughout the facility. Michael navigated the maze-like corridors, heading toward what facility schematics had indicated was an emergency exit. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. "This is unauthorized," James protested, though he continued following Michael. "The director says—" "Blackwood is not a director," Michael interrupted firmly. "He was the principal of your high school. He abducted you and your entire graduating class 13 years ago." James shook his head, as if trying to clear it. "That's impossible. I've been here at the Ascendancy Project my entire adult life. We're developing technologies to advance human potential." Despite his words, uncertainty had crept into his voice. They reached a junction where the corridor split in 3 directions. Michael hesitated, trying to recall the maintenance schematics he had glimpsed earlier. As he deliberated, James suddenly grasped his arm. "This way," James said, pointing to the right passage. "It leads to the communications center." Michael gave him a questioning look. "I designed the quantum encryption for the facility's communication systems," James explained. "We know the layout." Trusting his son's knowledge, Michael followed him down the right corridor. As they ran, James continued speaking, his words coming faster, as if something was unraveling in his mind. "There are inconsistencies in the timeline they've given us, gaps in my memory that don't align with their explanations, dreams that feel like memories." He glanced at Michael. "And your face. It appears in those dreams." They arrived at an unmarked door, which James opened using a complex code sequence. Inside was a small room filled with advanced communications equipment. James immediately began accessing a terminal, his fingers moving with practiced expertise. "What are you doing?" Michael asked, keeping watch at the door. "Creating a distraction," James replied, not looking up from his work, "and sending a message." On the screen, Michael could see James bypassing security protocols with remarkable ease, accessing what appeared to be the facility's main control systems. Moments later, alarms in their sections silenced and the lights in the corridor outside went dark. "I've rerouted security to the opposite wing," James explained. "They'll be searching for us there." He continued typing rapidly. "But more importantly, I'm broadcasting our location and situation on emergency frequencies. If your friend Eleanor reached the authorities, they'll receive confirmation of her story." Michael stared at his son in amazement. "You believe me?" James paused, his hands hovering over the keyboard. "I don't know what I believe yet, but there are too many inconsistencies in Blackwood's narrative, and—" He hesitated. "Something about you feels familiar in a way I can't explain through their conditioning models." A small smile crossed Michael's face. "You always were brilliant. Even Blackwood's mind control couldn't completely suppress that." "It's not mind control," James corrected automatically, then frowned as if questioning his own response. "At least, that's what they told us." He finished his work at the terminal and stood. "We should move. I've sent the broadcast. But they'll trace it soon." As they prepared to leave, James hesitated. "The others, my colleagues, they're still here." Michael nodded gravely. "I know, but we can't help them if we're captured. The best chance for everyone is to escape and bring back help." James seemed to struggle with this logic, his conditioned loyalty to the collective battling with his emerging sense of self. Finally, he nodded. "There's a maintenance exit near the power station. Security is minimal there because of the radiation concerns." They moved swiftly through darkened corridors, encountering no resistance thanks to James's security. Rerouting. As they approached the power station, James suddenly clutched his head, stumbling against the wall. "James?" Michael reached for him, concerned. "Memory fragments," James gasped. "They're breaking through the suppression. Mom's face, our dog Cooper, the football championship." He looked up at Michael, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Dad," Is it really you? The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Michael helped James to his feet, supporting him as they hurried toward the exit. They emerged onto a secluded part of the island, dense vegetation providing cover as they moved. Toward the shore. We need to reach the water, Michael explained. My friend Ray might still be offshore waiting for us. As they made their way through the underbrush, the sound of helicopter rotors suddenly filled the air. They froze, looking up to see not one but 3 helicopters approaching the island, their markings identifying them as Coast Guard and FBI. Eleanor did it, Michael breathed. She convinced them. The helicopters circled the compound, searchlights, sweeping the area. Over a loudspeaker, an authoritative voice announced, "Attention occupants of Blackwood Island. This is the FBI. The facility is surrounded. All personnel remain where you are. I repeat, do not attempt to leave the buildings." Michael and James watched from their hiding place as armed agents rappelled from the helicopters, securing the main compound entrance. In the distance, they could see boats approaching the island from multiple directions. A full-scale federal operation underway. "It's over," Michael said, relief washing over him. "Blackwood's experiment is finished." James's expression was complex, relief mingled with confusion and what appeared to be grief. "What happens to everyone now? This has been our only reality for 13 years. Michael placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "It will be difficult. There will be rehabilitation, therapy, reunification with families, but you'll all have something you've been denied for 13 years, choice." As federal agents spread across the island, Michael and James emerged from their hiding place, identifying themselves to the approaching officers. Within minutes, they were being escorted to a command post that had been established on the beach. There, amid the organized chaos of a major federal operation, Michael spotted a familiar figure, Eleanor Reynolds, speaking urgently with several FBI officials. When she saw Michael and James approaching, her face transformed with joy and disbelief. She rushed toward them, embracing Michael fiercely. "You made it," she whispered. "You actually made it." "Thanks. To you," Michael replied. "You convinced them." Eleanor stepped back, wiping tears from her eyes. "It wasn't easy. They thought I was delusional at first. But Ray backed up my story. And when they checked into Blackwood Enterprises and found the shell corporations and money trails, they finally believed me enough to investigate." Her gaze shifted to James, who stood awkwardly to the side, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional display and still struggling with his fragmenting conditioning. "This is James," Michael said simply. "He helped us escape. He sent the broadcast that confirmed your story." Eleanor nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. "Have you seen Sophia?" she asked, hope and fear mingling in her voice. "She's in the dormitory building," James said, his first direct words to Eleanor. "Section C, room 214. She's heading the biochemistry research division." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, fresh tears forming. An FBI agent who had been listening stepped forward. "We're systematically securing each building and identifying all subjects. Mrs. Reynolds, we'll notify you as soon as your daughter is located." The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. The island was completely secured, with Blackwood, Dr. Morrow, and other senior staff taken into custody. The graduates, nearly 300 of them, were being carefully processed, medical teams performing initial assessments before transport to mainland facilities better equipped for their care. Michael and James sat together on the beach, watching the operation unfold. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the water and bathing the scene in golden light. It was the first sunset James had seen as a free man in 13 years. "I still don't remember everything," James admitted, his voice quiet. "There are pieces missing and other pieces that don't make sense." "It will take time," Michael assured him, "but you're already breaking through their conditioning faster than they thought possible." James nodded, staring out at the ocean. They told us we were special, selected for our intellectual potential to advance human knowledge. Part of me still believes that's true. You are special, Michael said firmly. All of you are. But what Blackwood did was steal your lives, your choices. True advancement comes from freedom, not coercion. Their conversation was interrupted by an FBI agent approaching with news. Eleanor had been reunited with Sophia, though the young woman was struggling to comprehend the situation. Similar scenes were playing out across the command post as the first families began arriving, summoned by authorities to help with the identification and transition of the recovered graduates. We'll be transferring everyone to a specialized medical facility in Miami, the agent explained. There's never been a case quite like this before. The psychological implications alone will require extensive study and treatment. Michael nodded his understanding. We'll be ready whenever you are. As night fell, the island that had been a hidden prison for 13 years was transformed into a beacon of activity. Floodlights illuminating the operation, helicopters coming and going, boats shuttling personnel, and gradually the first groups of graduates to the mainland. Michael watched as James was examined by a neurologist who'd been flown in specifically to assess the graduates' cognitive conditioning. The doctor's expression was grave as he reviewed preliminary scans, but he offered cautious optimism. The conditioning appears to be breaking down now that the reinforcement protocols have stopped, he explained to Michael. It's remarkable, actually. Your son seems to be recovering memories at an accelerated rate compared to the others we've examined. He always was stubborn, Michael said with a small smile, like his old man. Later, as they prepared to board a Coast Guard vessel for transport to Miami, Michael and James stood at the edge of the beach, looking back at the compound that had been both home and prison for so long. What happens now? James asked, uncertainty evident in his voice. Michael placed an arm around his son's shoulders, feeling the unfamiliar contours of the man who had once been his boy. Now we go home. We heal. We rebuild. Together. James nodded, taking a deep breath of the salt air. Home, he repeated, testing the word as if it were from a foreign language he was just beginning to relearn. As they boarded the vessel, Michael gazed up at the night sky, the same stars that had guided him during his 13-year search, now witnessing its conclusion. Eleanor and Sophia were already aboard, sitting close together, their reunion still tentative but filled with promise. The Westridge High School class of 2010 was finally heading home, changed irrevocably by their ordeal, their futures uncertain, but finally free to choose their own paths forward. 6 months later, Michael stood at the edge of a different beach, the shoreline near his cottage in Pelican Bay. Beside him, James was skipping stones across the water, his technique improving. With each throw, they had established a new routine in these months since the rescue, finding their way back to each other through patience, therapy, and countless conversations that helped rebuild the bonds between them. The Blackwood Island case had become a national sensation, with ongoing investigations, congressional hearings, and debates about the ethical implications of the research conducted there. Warren Blackwood and his senior staff faced multiple charges, from kidnapping to human experimentation. The graduates were navigating their complex reintegration into society, each finding their own path toward healing. Many, including James, still struggled with the dual nature of their existence, the brilliant researchers they had been conditioned to be versus the individuals they had been before and were now rediscovering. Some chose to continue their scientific work, now on their own terms, recognizing that despite the horrific circumstances, their minds had been developed in ways that could genuinely benefit humanity if directed ethically. "Dad," James called, holding up a flat stone. "Watch this one." Michael smiled as he watched his son send the stones skipping across the water, 5, 6, 7 bounces before it finally sank beneath the surface. James had moved into the cottage with him, the simple surroundings providing a healing contrast to the sterile environment of the island compound. Not bad, Michael acknowledged, but I bet I can do better. As father and son continued their friendly competition, Michael reflected on their journey. The graduation caps washing ashore had been the key that unlocked a mystery that had consumed 13 years of his life. Now those same caps had become symbols of a different kind, of resilience, of the unbreakable bonds between parents and children, and of the undeniable human spirit that could not be fully suppressed, even by the most sophisticated conditioning. The story of the Westridge High School class of 2010 would be told for generations, a cautionary tale about the limits of scientific ambition, but also a testament to the power of love and determination that had brought them home. If this incredible story of perseverance and hope has touched your heart, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more extraordinary true stories that remind us of the strength of the human spirit. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, sometimes the most important discoveries in life aren't made in laboratories, but in the unwavering commitment of those who refuse to give up on the people they love.